Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of Entrepreneurial Impact with myself, Joe Martin, and Dave Donaldson, my ride and shotgun partner today. And what I'm really excited about is that you all turned in and spent some time this week to listen to our 25-minute podcast. And I believe that, I'm really excited about the topic today because I think it actually helps out with not only self-mastery of like what matters to you, but also your people. And I believe thoroughly that leadership needs to inspire hope, that we can't motivate people. People have to have internal motivation. But what I do believe people can do as a leader is inspire those around you to be a better version of themselves by providing hope. And that's what I'm really excited. That's what we're going to cover today. We're going to talk about motivation, hope, inspiration, and how to help that through an actual like systematic plan.
When I think about motivation, right, I think we all need it to some different degrees. Right? Some get it through books, some get it through podcasts, some people get it through TikToks, some people get it from their kids or friends or family, whoever you surround yourself with. In different times of your life, right? Last week, we talked about the Black Swan event of the NAR and the different things that are happening around the summer. There's some people that need to get motivated and picked up. So we kind of really thought it was really great to kind of bring that into this week's conversation to kind of keep you going, stay in the positive mindset and go, listen, things are going to happen always. But how you carry yourself, who you surround yourself with, and how you look at things is what's going to get you through.
Yeah. And I mean, I'll be fierce about this, and I'm happy to be debated on this, is that motivation is internal. I cannot instill motivation onto you. I can inspire you. I think inspiration is momentarily like capable. Like I can have a conversation with you. You can be inspired.
Yes.
But I can't actually motivate. Now there's external motivators, like, hey, you don't do this, you're going to be fired. Or, hey, you do this, you're going to get this $10,000 bonus, right? There's external motivators, and those are okay, but they're not like long lasting, because it's like, well, what, you're going to fire me? Oh, so now it's a threat? Like, I don't know how I'm going to engage on that one, right? Or, if you say, oh, you can get $10,000. Hey, in my beginning of my leadership journey, I was like, yeah, why don't we give incentives around monetary or trips and things like that? And frankly, there's probably 10% of your workforce that's working with you that actually gives two flips about their $10,000 bonus or their trip to, Hawaii. So yeah, you have external motivators, but those are fleeting, and they're more like short term, and they're not like long term type of like getting to your goals. And that's why I've really tried to internalize the fact that I can't motivate you. I can inspire you to a better future, or I can inspire you to understand that if you don't take action on this certain thing, you're going to lose something that's very important to you, or you're not going to experience something that you actually want in your life.
When we first started breaking this down, when we're talking about, so you're talking about like there's the progression of motivation, right? And that's kind of what I'm hearing you say. And right, some people are self-motivated by money or goals or whatever that is, just perpetually inspired. Others need things to draw on them to drive them towards motivation, right? And even like you get inspired from somebody. We saw Tony Robbins. We saw Mel Robbins. They were inspiring and inspirational in the moment. And they said, I'm going to run through a wall. I've got a guy in a market center I was just coaching with the other day. He literally bought a trampoline for his office. Right? Like he was like, I'm going to jump and get myself going before my calls and work himself up. Was like, he was inspired by Tony's dancers, right? But he's taking action, right? So there's a progressional change for him to instill himself to recognize that I'm not 100% self-motivated. There's a process I have to go through to get myself there. And that awareness, very important.
And I think that's what we're going to get into now is like the type. I typically see 4 types of motivation in people. And this is what I just want to anchor for everybody here is that like, I believe external, when people say, oh, I need a boss to be motivated, or I need this to be motivated. Like I believe leaders and bosses can inspire, which is what, if you've ever gone to a Tony Robbins event, or you've gone to like some type of like energy, pick me up, Grant Cardone, whatever you want to call it, you get inspired. And if you notice behaviorally, you'll be inspired for a short period of time. But unless you tap into your own personal motivators, that inspiration eventually wanes. And if you're not around that person on a regular basis to inspire you, you'll actually lose those feelings because you have to actually control your own motivation, right? So if you go into like, what was the guy named Tim Grover? Like he was the guy that was the coach for Michael Jordan and Kobe Bryant. Like he's a professional elite athlete coach. He will literally when you get like interviewed by him to get screened to see if you could be a client, if you're not hugely internally accountable and motivated on your own, he won't even take you as a
Yeah,
client because he's
if you haven't read it,
that
his book Winning, right? Yes, he's not like, hey, let me get you motivated. He is taking the motivated, right, and to the next level, right? You already got to have a
exactly.
high fuel efficient engine with high octane burning, and then go from there.
Yeah, and that's what I want people to now as we jump into this, the four things of motivation I see with people. I want to be very clear about that because I think in our world, there's this like, oh, why weren't you successful where you were? Well, my boss wasn't motivating and he wasn't did this and they did, or she didn't do that. And I'm like, no, no, no. Motivation comes internal. So when I see there's four types of in my world in internal motivations. The first one is, and I'm actually ranking this by like least impactful over time to most
Okay.
impactful over time. So the first one is progression. Now, I've heard titles, I've heard climbing the corporate ladder, whatever an acronym or an analogy you want to give it to, but it's progression. And what I mean by progression is, let's use Walmart. Some people are motivated by knowing they know exactly what the next step is. That if I start at Walmart and I'm a greeter, oh, you know what? Next thing I get to become is the person that brings in all the carts, and then after that, I become a check cashier, right? Or the cashier, and then from being a cashier, I go to customer service for returns, or maybe I go work some other specialty electronic area for cashiering, right? And then from cashier, I become a area like inside the store, and then from there I get a whole division, and then eventually I can become the assistant general manager, then the general manager, then maybe I become divisional, territorial. I don't know those rankings, but the whole idea of what I'm elaborating is when you're meeting with people, and even for yourself, think about yourself and your teams. Some people are just motivated by progression, and the moment they hit the max role that they can get in that environment, their motivation goes away because they're like, well, why would I keep grinding and why would I keep hustling when I've already hit the epitome of where I could go? Another way to look at this is why companies that say we're going to be number one then fail because their whole motivation was get to number one, get to number one, get to number one, get to number one. And their energy was based on I went from 10 to 7, 7 to
Right.
3, 3 to 2, 2 to 1. And then as soon as you hit that, there's nothing else to aspire to. So your motivation goes away.
Yeah, you're right. That
Right.
that measurable of positioning type of motivation can only get you so far if you're actually doing the things to get you to begin with, right? Because then it becomes deflating. Like, all right, what's next? We're here. We won the championship. This the one thing about that winning book was kind of cool. Is like once you've won it, it's over. You're starting all over again.
Yeah. Winning owes you nothing. So the next one is lifestyle. And what I mean by lifestyle is that like you'll see this actually in people's trajectory of their life is that like when someone gets to like $1 million or $10 million in wealth and then they go bankrupt and they literally go down to zero, you'll see them reinvigorate with energy because then they're trying to get back to their lifestyle. And what I mean by that is, I'll use even like my journey, even though I'm not motivated by really by lifestyle, but like you hustle to get to a certain level of stability because you're trying to survive, right? So you'll see people be like, I'm going to work 3 jobs, right? And they're working their butts off. They're working 3 jobs. They got a day shift, they got a mid shift, they got a late night shift. They're working 18 hours, whatever it may be. And they're just hustling because they got to get money on the table, right? Or that you'll see brand new real estate agents because we're based in real estate. You'll see them constantly in the office 5 days a week, making lead gen calls, setting their appointments, doing all the follow up. But you're seeing them work like a crazy person with their hair on fire because they're realizing that I only have 10 grand in the bank, or I got negative 10 grand in the bank, and I got to get out of this. And they're trying to say, hey, I want to be able to pay my rent. I want to be able to buy this house. I want to have this car. I want to go to these dinners. I want to go on these vacations. I want to live in this neighborhood. I want to go to this country club, blah, blah, blah. Now, I'll use a baseline number. Say you're usually making 50 grand a year and you need to be making 400,000 to get to the lifestyle I just described. You will bust your butt to get to 400. But once 400 hit, 400 delivers the lifestyle that you've always ascended to want to have. Now, there's no incentive to work any harder than to maintain the 400,000. So if you look around you for high achievers, you'll see them cap out at 400, maybe it's a million, but you'll see them work hard enough to maintain that lifestyle. But they won't do anything more than that because that's all they want because they were motivated to get to a lifestyle of dinners out, cars, like I said,
They get
country trips, whatever it
comfortable,
may be. And then
complacent,
exactly.
right? All of that. Don't need to work any harder because I've achieved the level that I've always wanted, right? So,
Yep. And that's that
right,
motivation.
their motivation is different now, right? They didn't have
Yeah.
that
And then,
bigger
and then
why,
they
wasn't
make like,
driving it, right? It was a financial.
correct.
It
Yeah.
was not a
Yeah.
bigger
And then,
variant of why am I motivated? Why is this important? That's that harder conversation of getting to like, okay, it's good to have goals, but is that goal really why you're doing what you're trying to do?
exactly, that question of what does that number represent for you, right? That's exactly what you're hitting on. And that also goes back to the caveat on lifestyle, and then we'll get into the third one. Is lifestyle is also why if someone crashes out of their lifestyle, you'll still see them come back with like a vengeance. They'll be like, oh, well, you never hustled this hard before. Well, it's because they lost
Yeah.
everything. So they're back to square one. So now they got to hustle again to get back to that lifestyle they want. So the third one is what I call competition. And however you want to call it, anything else, but it's competition. It means that, like, if the third motivator is people want to have, say, they've got a rival or they got somebody to compete against, right? So if you played sports, especially a team sport or even individual sport, that for that matter, you will have this internal drive when you know that there's other people that are better than you, right? So, I played football. I played defensive line. We had, probably 12 defensive linemen on the team between DNs, nose tackles, and defensive tackles. They were all your friends, but you knew that you had to outperform them to get the starting job. And in life, if you always have a competitor, so they talk about coaches are great, or having a business partner, or even like a friendly competitor, is that people will compete and compete and compete because they don't want to. And that goes back to Tim Grover's winning, is that like the essence of winning is so euphoric in most people if they're highly aggressive and competitive, that competition alone will drive somebody. I mean, I got a couple friends that work for Diageo corporate, and Diageo owns a massive amount of portfolio in like liquor brands, and a lot of them the same type of spirit,
Yep.
right? So you got a bunch of rums, a bunch of vodkas, a bunch of tequilas and whiskeys, but they will have literally divisions. And they'll say they own, Captain Morgan and Bacardi, and I don't know, pick another rum. I'm drawing a blank.
The Kraken.
Kraken, right? They might own all those three brands, but they'll have three teams inside of Diageo, and I've got Kraken, you've got Captain Morgan, and Ann's got Bacardi. They're going to hammer on all three of us to be like, why is Dave beating you in sales with Captain Morgan? Right. And the point behind that is if you don't put competition on people, you default to the lowest common denominator. But the competition, what happens though is that at some point, the bigger why, like you brought up on the second motivation, is that, okay, I can compete with somebody and compete and compete and compete. And at some point, your maturity gets to a level you're like, well, I actually really only want to compete with myself. Now that's hard. And that actually leads into the fourth motivator. But I want to really stay on competition, is that competition, and putting people in environments like that really want to compete and enjoy competition and enjoy pressure and performance, you can go a long way in just having a competitive environment. A long way.
And look, a lot of people can't handle that environment, right? That's where you'll see people survive, and people like all those things you mentioned, like, well, they're cutthroat, or they did this, or they did that. Look, there's a right way and there's a wrong way. We get that. There's the gray areas of doing business. However, motivation and drive through competition, like you hear all the stories about Kobe and Michael, this, that, or the other thing. But there was the one that kind of stands out to me the most, where Kobe was at the Olympics, and one of his teammates on Team Croatia, and he drove through them and blew this guy up. And they were like, what are you doing? And like, look, he's my teammate in Chicago or LA, but out here, he's the competition. So
he lit him up.
Yeah,
too.
He did.
He lit him up.
So
it was Paul Gasol.
It was
right?
Paul Gasol. Yeah, I had Luka Doncic in my head, but yeah, it's Paul Gasol. And that was his mindset. It's like, I know the play they're going to run, and I'm going to put him on his ass because he's the competition. He wasn't wrong. It was his mindset. But I think a lot of people struggle. That competitive spirit is one thing. Rah, rah, we're against each other. I win, you didn't. It's something different when you got to go toe-to-toe with somebody, and you got to survive or they got to survive. People fall into emotions and feelings. There's a dynamic to that. that makes it really, really hard for a lot of people to be successful in a competitive environment and that because they look at it as it's at somebody else's expense.
Yeah, and you know what? I think I get that in like sports. I really do like that. There's almost a zero sum game. Like either you win or you lose. I get that in
Right.
sports, right? But I think there's actually some difference in business because I believe there's so much business out there to be had. Now, unless you're in a really small industry where there's only like I don't know 3 suppliers and you're the sales rep, like okay, maybe there is like and there's only 3 customers, something like that, and you have limited like suppliers, buyers, and distribution channels, I could see how that might be a problem. But when you look at real estate, there's just so many people that need housing, and there's so many different opportunities and so many different business models. I think competition is like, okay, you had a better value prop, you could serve them better, but I'm not getting mad that you won because that's just the game. I know I'm going to lose, but I got to take enough at bats to know that there is opportunity out there. And I think that's also something people have to realize is just because I lost the first swing doesn't mean I'm losing the
Yeah.
game, right? And which leads into the final one, which is just purpose. So you hear a lot within different companies of what's your why, what's your motivating driver, what's your purpose in life, what is the impact and legacy you want to leave, and number 4 is the strongest motivator, which is purpose. Um, and when it comes to purpose, the reason I bring this up is that like, hey, you start off and you get all these titles because that's progression. Number 2 is lifestyle. You get all these trinkets, this money, blah blah blah. And then number 3 is your competition. You beat some people, you've come out on top, you're a winner. Okay, so if I do those first 3 things, what else do I have in life? Like if I did that by the time I'm 40, I got another 40 years. Like I don't need to brag about my titles anymore. I did that. I don't need to brag about my lifestyle. I've got that. I don't need to brag about who I beat or how I won these contracts or whatever the thing may be because I did it. Like, there's this quote in sports that I always love is that like act like you've been there before because winners know what it's like to be there
No,
before, right?
you're spot on. And that's why I kind of love this purpose moment. For those of you that have been following our podcast, and we've been doing these, believe it or not, we're really closing on 100 episodes here. And I'm not exactly where that's going to short because I can't count, because of math. But if you look back to a lot of the earlier episodes that we've done, a lot of where we started was the purpose mission of why we do what we do for business, right? We talked about the name of our podcast is Entrepreneurial Impact. And that impact really a lot of times spent having conversations around the purpose of what we're doing. And you look at the stories that Tom told about smuggling supplies into the Ukraine at the beginning of the war, right? Sheena Sadam and talking about some of the wells and the drilling that they were doing over in Africa, right? Kristen and some of the stories and some of the benefits that they had. And then Dr. Tran and his journey coming over from his country and survivability and now paying it forward with things. There are so many stories that are happening because people have had success, right?
Mm-hmm.
That they wouldn't be able to do their purpose without winning. And we're just summing this up, that they had a progression and a lifestyle change and competition to get to the purpose. Now, some people identified that purpose early on. Some people are fortunate. And I'll say fortunate on clarity, maybe not fortunate on some of the experiences that they've had. Okay. But the
Yeah.
experience that drives the purpose for clarity earlier than others. So there are things that happen throughout your life that all of a sudden you have that aha moment. This is what I'm meant to do. This is what I'm supposed to do with what I've accomplished, right?
Yeah.
That kind of really just bring it, but it takes time, right? And getting above
Yeah. I
that
mean,
competitive to that purposeful takes
mhm.
an experience, and it takes the journey to find what that might be to really pour gasoline in what you're trying to do.
Yeah. And I think it just brings it. Um, God, I know you've been around me for almost over 4 years now, Dave. So I'm sure you've heard this before. Is that the thing that grounds me the most around purpose has to do with the fact that if you put yourself out 80 years from now, or not 80 years from now, but you're 80, 85, 90, 100, whatever, and your last few days on Earth, right? Well, I'm not going to be morbid. I'm going to bring this back. I promise we'll go from darkness to light. Um, the piece that I think is important to recognize is that when you talk about legacy, This is why people want to have buildings named after them and streets after them, and those and schools dedicated to their name, is that they want to know that after I die that somebody remembers me or that I impacted somebody. And my driving question that I ask whenever I lead people and the organizations that I have the opportunity to do so with is I constantly think I'm on my deathbed. I'm going to be thinking about who did I actually help, right? Who did I actually impact, teach, give something to that actually changed their life? And I keep going back to the people I've led, managed, employed. And I always want to think how did I change their life? And not in some cerebral, no, literally that I gave them a tool, I gave them an opportunity, I created an environment or a platform for them to go do something that changes their own life because they wouldn't have had that opportunity somewhere else. Or they learned how to file their taxes, or they learned how to buy their first piece of property, or they were able to, understand something. It's wow, no one's ever spent the time to teach me that. And I just made made them better. And when they wake up and they go do something, they're yeah, you know what? It's almost like the Jack Welch example that his goal at GE was, how many Fortune 500 CEOs can I pump out of GE? They don't need to be Fortune 500 CEO at GE. I want to look around and see all the CEOs that are in those positions because they came through our leadership development. And I think that's when you think about purpose, is that how do you give somebody a lift? How do you give them a hand? How do you give them, and that doesn't mean you do it for them. Sometimes they got to learn some challenging lessons. But at the end of the day, you're a platform to create better versions of everybody that you come in contact with. And I think that's my purpose. And I think that when you get to that level, there's no challenge, there's no setback, there's no negative thing that could ever happen, because you're no, it's just part of the journey, and that's not going to derail me from my purpose in life.
Absolutely. And it's funny, as you were saying that, I was could think so. It's the pharaohs of old, scraping the other pharaohs' names and likenesses off of the wall. So question is, and we'll find this out in the future, who's this is Joe scratching off the wall to replace with his own. So in order to find that out, join us on another episode of Entrepreneurial Impact, and we'll see you all next week. Take care, everybody.